Buddy. Happy Friday. Happy snow day, so to speak. Go ahead and hit pause and try to figure out the part of speech and definition of quell. All right, today we have a Q word, which is very rare. The word is quell. Now, part of speech is pretty straightforward because we have quellid and quell, and that tells us that it must be a verb because verbs are the only part of speech that change based on tense. Very good. So Grandma quelled the fire with a quilt. It looks like maybe she's waving it. So maybe she waved the fire? She fanned it? Okay, let's see another sentence and plug in that and see if that makes sense. The mother attempted to quell the infant's cries by singing a lullaby. So if we plug in wave there, the mother attempted to wave the infant's cries? Probably not. What would you try to do? You're trying to maybe quiet the infant's cries, maybe calm down the infant, and maybe Grandma is trying to calm the fire down to put it out. The National Guard was sent in to try to quell the rioting crowd. Okay, so if you have a crowd that is rioting, you're going to try to calm them down, right? So to quell means to calm down. So one thing I want you guys to think about is, you might have, based on one sentence, you might have an idea of what it means, but you want to use multiple sentences and double check. You plug in your word, and if it makes sense, you're probably right. And if it doesn't make total sense, well, then you might want to retry. So very good. All right. I should have said this on Monday, but please do your best not to misplace your books. At the end of the year, Sister will send home some information about how you guys have some things in your lockers, right, that you want to take home, and you've got textbooks and books. So Sister's going to send home some information about how we're going to do that. So please try your best not to misplace those books because I want to share them with more kiddos like yourself. All right, I want to keep talking about this poem because it's a great introduction for us to poetry. That's why it's called Introduction to Poetry, right? So here's what I want to do. Let's read it together one more time. I'll read one line, you read one line. And our purpose today is to try to figure out, what does Billy Collins want? What does he want us to do? Right? What does he want readers to do with a poem? All right, and we're going to try to prove it. All right? So I'll read one line, you read one line. Ready? I asked them to take a poem like a color slide. I say, drop a mouse into a poem, or walk inside the poem's room. I want them to water ski, waving at the author's name on shore. Is tie the poem with a chair with a rope. They begin beating it with a hose. Okay, kind of strange. He wants us to take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide. He wants us to press our ear against its hive. Do you think Billy Collins wants us to literally put our ear up against the poem? Why don't you go ahead and put your ear up against the poem right now? What is the poem saying to you? It's not saying anything, right? What could he mean? We're not going to literally, right? He's being figurative, right? He doesn't want us literally to push our ear up to a poem, but what might he want us to do with our ears? What are our ears used for? What are they good for? Listening, hearing. What do you think he wants us to do with poems? He wants us to use our ears. Poems were meant to be what? They're meant to be heard. Okay. So maybe Billy Collins wants us to hear poems. What do you think he meant when he said, hold a poem up to the light like a color slide? Why do you put something up to a color slide? It's kind of like a projector. It makes it larger. Do you put it up on a light color slide? Do you put it up to the light for your ears? No! It's for your eyes, right? So maybe he wants us to see poems. Maybe he wants us to hear poems. He wants us to drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out. Again, he wants us to observe, right? Like, a lot of poems are going to tell stories, and maybe he wants us to watch the poem, right? Kind of like TV, like you kind of watch as the scenes play out, like you watch a play. Okay. Walk inside the poem's room. Poems don't have rooms, persons do. And feel the walls for a light switch. He wants us to use our eyes, he wants us to use our ears, but he also wants us to use our hands. He wants us to feel the poem. And again, I think he's being figurative, right? He doesn't mean like, oh yeah, touch the poem. Oh yeah, it's smooth, it's paper. If a poem is about, grass, well, maybe we should read that poem outside while we're laying on grass, while we feel like the blades of grass prickling our legs or something. So it sounds like Billy Collins wants us to physically to feel poems. Okay. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on shore. This one's interesting. How many of you have ever been water skiing? I have never been water skiing. I would be terrified. But I have gone tubing on a lake. Anybody ever ridden on a jet ski? I've ridden on a jet ski. I mean, how would you describe that? Riding, tubing on a lake or being on a boat. I'd say it's pretty exciting. Does Billy Collins want reading a poem to be like, I don't know, sitting on the couch, reading it in your mind, quietly to yourself, falling asleep? No, he wants it to be like water skiing, right? He wants this experience to be something that's fun. And then there's what they want to do. They want to tie the poem to their chair, and they want to torture a confession out of it. Smack. They begin beating it with a hose to try to figure out what it really means. Okay. So we're going to think about who are they? We're going to think about that on Monday, next time. But right now, what does Billy Collins want readers to do with a poem? What does he want us to do? Let's say I wanted to make a strong thesis. If I was making a strong thesis, I should have 2 things, right? What 2 things should I have in my thesis statement to make sure my reader knows what I'm talking about? I should have the author of the poem, and I should have the title. So, what does Billy Collins want? I get rid of the question word what, and now I have, in his poem, Introduction to Poetry, Billy Collins wants readers to blank. Do you notice a problem with my thesis? Introduction to Poetry is the title of a poem. Do you remember what we do with titles of poems? We put them in quotation marks. Very good. So there we go. All better. Much better. What does he want us to do? Well, remember, he wants us to hold it up to a color slide, and he wants us to watch it, just like you drop a mouse in and watch it get its way out. He wants us to use our eyes. He wants us to put our ear up to it. He wants us to hear. He wants us to feel the walls for a light switch, right? He wants us to feel. So what would you say? He wants us to do what? He wants us to use our what? Our senses, exactly. Poems should, like great poems, are visceral. They are experiences, right? Maybe they remind you of something. Like a great poem would remind you of something in your own life. They speak to you personally, and they invoke smells and tastes and sounds. Interesting that Billy Collins doesn't talk about smells or tastes. I think we could add that to the poem. I think a great poem tastes like bubblegum antibiotics. I don't know why, but I love the taste of bubblegum flavored antibiotics. Anywho, let's move on. Today, our next type of poem, drum roll please, is concrete poems. So a concrete poem is meant to look a particular way on the page. In other words, it makes a concrete shape. And here I have an example. What does that poem look like? It's a panda. So a concrete poem looks like usually what the poem is about. You might figure that this poem is about a panda, and it is. So go ahead and hit pause and copy down that definition. All right, I'm going to go on, but hit pause, okay? and make sure you have that definition down. Our final poem for the day, drum roll please. Our final type of poem for this beautiful Friday is acrostic poem. So an acrostic poem is a poem where certain letters in each line spell out a word or a phrase. Now that might be a bit confusing, so I'll give you an example. Here I have a poem. Man, I wonder sometimes if there exists a real onion. Now, if you look up and down, you'll notice that the poem, if you look across, right, it spells out Mr. O. That's me, right? So an acrostic, it kind of looks like a crossword puzzle, right? Where the letters, they spell out something, and then those letters are also part of the line. Now, this is kind of a silly example, right? Obviously. And you'll notice, like, if you look at the S, sometimes the letter that's, how do I say this? The letter like S there, you notice how that's the end of the word. It could have been the middle of the word. So it doesn't always have to be the first word in the line. If I wanted to write a poem about friendship, I could spell the word friendship up and down, and then each letter would be part of a line. Okay? So go ahead and hit pause and make sure you have that definition down. And then I'd like to play a game. So go ahead and quiz yourself. See how many of these you get right. All right? You're not turning this in, but it kind of quiz yourself. See which terms you know and which ones you need to review. All right? What type of poem is this? Is this a free verse, concrete poem, haiku, or acrostic? This is number 1. A broken altar, Lord, thy servant rears, made of a heart and cemented with tears. Okay, let's move on to number 2. Waves washing ashore, volumes of water ebb and flow on sandy beaches. Is that free, concrete, haiku, or acrostic? Here we have Lazy Jane. And by the way, if you ever need more time, just hit pause. Lazy Jane. Lazy, 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 lazy Jane. She wants a drink of water, so she waits and waits and waits and waits for it to rain. Go ahead and hit pause. Is that free, concrete, haiku, or acrostic? We walked through the forest unarmed, with our eyes mostly open, listening to birdsong, painting rainbows in our minds. We step on thorns with bare feet and have conversations with cobras, clothe ourselves in light and love. Yet we are followed by a lone tiger hunting, who always wins in this preordained game. What type of poem would that be? I also have a bonus question for you here. Conversations with cobras, clothe ourselves. What sound do you hear? Is that, do you remember what that's called? All those C sounds at the beginning of a word? That would be alliteration. Very good. All right, last one. And now, once again, winter wind breathes sighingly amid the pine trees. So is that free, concrete, haiku, or acrostic? So let's start with this example because it's already on the screen. This is a haiku because it's 3 lines and then it's 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5. This poem is a free verse poem. It has no rhyme scheme and it's just a bunch of lines. There's no punctuation, right? It has absolutely no rules. It's just a bunch of 2 lines stanzas. How many stanzas is it? 8. Very good. All right, Lazy Jane. There might be 2 answers here. I could see this as being a free verse poem because it clearly has no rules, right? I mean, most of the lines just say the word lazy. I think it could also be a concrete poem. What does this poem look like? To me, it kind of looks like a raindrop falling into Lazy Jane's mouth. So a poem that makes a concrete image is a concrete poem. Waves, that spells the word waves, and it spells it across, right? You can look up and down. You look across and you see the word wave, so it's an acrostic. This poem, The Altar, looks like an altar, kind of-ish. So it's meant to look like an altar for sure. And therefore, a poem that looks like a concrete shape would be a concrete poem. Very good. All right, so what you're going to do today, you've got 2 prompts to think of, and I want you to pick one. If you want to write about your fears today, write about your fears. If you want to write about something that you're proud of, write about something that you're proud of. So just pick one, okay? I'm going to go now to the actual class page really quick, just to show you where this is. So here's Monday's work, where the haiku goes, and then here's Wednesday's work. So today's work goes here on Friday. So what I want you to do, I want you to pick one. Today, I'm going to write about one of my greatest fears. So I might even just delete that part. And I'm going to write about, I'm really horrified. I love growing pumpkins, but last year I had a horrible time doing it. They got eaten by bugs, and they got mildew, and it was horrible. So one of my worst fears is, working really hard, putting in a lot of effort, and my pumpkins, they still die. So the first thing I want you to do is just take maybe 2-3 minutes and just jot down your thoughts. What's something that you're really afraid of that could happen? Or something that you're really proud of. Maybe your proudest moment. If I'm thinking about one of my most proud moments, it might be the time I scored a touchdown in grade school. That's my only touchdown I ever scored. So I could write about that time when I scored a touchdown. So take 2 or 3 minutes and jot down your thoughts. And then the assignment is you're going to create a visual representation of your proudest moment or your biggest fear, okay? And you're going to make it by creating a acrostic poem or a concrete poem, okay? So I'm going to give you an example. So right here, I made a concrete poem, and it looks, well, what do you think it looks like? It looks like a pumpkin, right? And it's all about those squash bugs and how it got blackened, and those squash bugs are savage and they're evil. So I created a concrete poem out of my biggest fear. Now, I could have also done an acrostic. You could do one or the other. So for an acrostic, maybe my word is touch down. And for each line, I'm gonna have a line of the poem. So the ball slowly twirls in the air, right? Because it was the quarterback passed me the ball, so I'm seeing it float in the air. So whichever one you're writing about, you can get bonus points if you do both. Okay. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. All right, and make sure that when you're done with all 3 of your poems that you hit turn in. Okay, so don't hit turn in until you're done with all 3 of your poems, the ones from Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If you want to do your concrete poem on a separate paper, because it's much easier to handwrite, like this was not easy, okay, then please feel free to do it on paper and just send me a picture of it. One other thing I want to show you, I have a link posted for you. I'm going to show you. There's a website where you can plug in all the words in order to create a concrete poem. So what you do first is you select a shape, and there are only so many shapes, so that's kind of the tricky part. So, you could do a llama, or, I don't know, ghosts are kind of scary. You don't have to do that. That's how I made my pumpkin, okay? So anywho, make sure you hit turn in when you're all done, and have a fabulous Friday and a great weekend. Love you guys.